I'm Kevin Thomas, Senior Pastor of Forest Lake United Methodist Church. Thank you for joining us as we look at this week's lectionary readings. Today, let's talk about Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." I must confess, as a pastor, this story doesn't really make sense to me, and I'm not talking about the walking on the water part. Instead, I'm talking about the timing of the story. It immediately follows the feeding of the multitude. Remember that story from last week? Jesus spent all afternoon teaching the crowd, then he miraculously feeds them with 5 loaves and 2 fish. As a preacher, I'm thinking the crowd is ready to follow. We might expect Jesus to offer an altar call, to sign up some new disciples, maybe even baptize some people. They were ready. But Jesus walked away. He dismisses the crowd and goes up the mountain alone to pray. Seems a little odd to walk away when there are so many fruitful conversations he could have had. But it's time for him to be alone. So Jesus leaves, apparently leaving work undone. Actually, it's not unusual for Jesus to act this way. On the contrary, it's the norm. Jesus had a very healthy rhythm in his life of engaging and disengaging. He would work intensely with the crowds, teaching, healing, and feeding. Then he would withdraw and renew his own soul in one-on-one time with his Father. Engaging and disengaging. Both are necessary and holy actions. Yes, it is holy to step away sometimes. If Jesus needed that kind of rhythm in his life, how much more do we need it in ours? How's your balance these days? Have you been in one extreme for too long? Feeling stressed? It may be time for a Sabbath rest. During the pandemic, we might feel like we've disengaged for too long. If that's the case, let's pursue safe ways to re-engage with Christ's mission in the world. Either way, let's pursue balance in our lives that we might live in spiritual health that God desires for us.